Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Psychology of Leadership. We're just going to give it another minute or two to let some last-minute people sign on to the webinar, and then we'll get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the Psychology of Leadership webinar. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Regional Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers in the Asia-Pacific region. We've had over 300 people register for today's webinar, so because of the large audience in attendance, we are going to keep everybody on mute during the webinar. We will address questions at the end, which you can submit through your GoToWebinar dashboard. You'll see a questions section. So you can insert your questions at any point during the session today, and we'll pick them up at the end. You should also see that we've provided a few handouts available for download through your dashboard, including a case study that's going to be referenced during the presentation. The webinar is going to run for 90 minutes until 1:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Time and will be facilitated by Cameron Nott, Psychologist and Managing Director at the Myers-Briggs Company. Cameron has extensive experience working with organizations across the Asia-Pacific region in areas of talent identification, organizational change, team effectiveness, and leadership development. And today, Cameron will be sharing insights, recent research, and various models, including some of our own, for developing agile leaders and leadership teams. His bio is also available in the handout section of your dashboard if you'd like to take a closer look at his background and experience. But otherwise, I will turn you over to Cameron.
Great. Thank you, Kat. And thank you, everyone, for joining our session today. So when it comes to leadership, especially the executive levels, we know that having a vision and communicating it and translating it into a practical business plan is important. So I thought we'd jump in and start the session today by sharing what might be considered an exceptional example of this. So this here is Masayoshi-san. He's the richest man in Japan and is the chair of Japan's largest company, SoftBank. SoftBank it's an interesting company. It's very diverse. But I guess they're really known for being an investor in new and developing technologies. Masayoshi-san, in his presentations to shareholders, outlined his 300-year vision for his company. So again, we're looking at a fairly exceptional example of this capability. You might be interested in what were some of the themes that he did present on, and these are actually some slides from his presentation. So he talked a bit about how in our future we will be learning to, perhaps more so than we do already, to coexist with robots, which as you look at his slide, it doesn't look to be too much of a scary word. Actually, it looks quite fun. We've got little robots in chef hats and carrying shovels, and they look like a pretty groovy bunch of people robots to be interacting with. He also suggested that our average life expectancy will be increasing to over 200 years. And when I learned about that, I started to apply moisturizer. It's never too late to start. And a third theme from his presentation is that we're all going to be developing a new form of communication, which is telepathy. And I used to think that I was excited by this one until I really had a look at the images, and it seems in the future we all might be getting migraines. So we'll see how we go with the telepathy. So vision is important, and we're going to be talking about vision more as we start to move through the content of psychology of leadership. The session today, we hope to share with you some models and some practical insights that you can take back to the workplace and to help the people who you look to support. As Kat mentioned, it will be, there are a lot of people who've registered for the session today, and we will be holding the questions until the end. That being said, it will be interactive, so there will be some moments, some slides where I'll pause. I'll ask for your feedback, for you to share some examples, to participate as part of this session. Just to tell you a little bit more about who we are. So the Myers-Briggs Company, we've been around for over 60 years, and we're very much a mission-driven organisation. And you can see our mission there is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. And we look to deliver our mission through our talent identification and consultancy services, and also through offering certification in trusted psychometric assessments for those practitioners who want to be able to bring this capability in-house. Something also that I like to mention that we're really proud of at the Myers-Briggs Company is that we've gone through a process of officially certifying ourselves as a benefit corporation, also known as a B Corp. This is a globally recognised standard that says, as an organisation, we look to balance our commercial goals alongside goals we have for our employees, the community, and the environment. The B Corp movement is something which was launched in 2006. There's now over 2,700 companies that are involved in more than 60 countries around the world, and we think it's a really important movement, and we encourage all companies out there, big and small, to learn more about it. So today, in terms of the psychology of leadership, we're going to be looking at it in terms of three different components. We're going to be looking at leaders and what's important in developing leaders, and what are some of the forces we need to consider. We'll be looking at leadership teams, so how leaders work together, and then we're going to be looking more broadly across the organisation to look at what are some of the silent killers that can get in the way of effective leadership development. Ultimately, however, what we hope that you take away from the session today is an appreciation, or perhaps a deeper appreciation, of how the performance of leaders and leadership teams can be greatly enabled through the power of psychological insight. So as we do work through the session today, assessments will be a theme, talking a bit about how they can be useful in developing leaders and leadership teams. So developing leaders. So we're living in a VUCA world, and this is a term that many of you may have heard of. It's a term that's been around since the 1980s, where it was describing the change and uncertainty that was experienced in a post-Cold War environment. However, this term VUCA is probably being used much more recently in the last 4 years or so with the nature of change and disruption that we're experiencing in the world. Once again, just to describe that uncertainty that we are all experiencing in our world today. VUCA, as you can see on the screen, stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility is a reference to the nature and speed of change in our world today. Uncertainty is really looking at that sense of unpredictability that we now have in our work, where there's a greater prospect for surprise. Indeed, disruption has become the new norm. Complexity, where we have multiplex of forces that we need to contend with in our world. Perhaps we used to be more concerned about local forces that were affecting us or more national concerns, but now we're very much tuned into the global environment, recognizing that there are forces or trends that can have an impact on us in our local work. Ambiguity is really suggesting there's a sense of haziness that we have in our decision making, where there could be a greater potential for misreads of our environment. Just some examples of the different forces that are contributing to this VUCA world. So there are many examples of economic and political changes. We can see what's occurring in Europe right now, but indeed relationship between the US and China is also having a big impact on many of us. Technology is having a big impact too. So if we look at locally within Australia, automation has had a big impact on the manufacturing environment. But we're also starting to see that automation is having an effect in the professional services environment too, such as accounting, law, and even in the medical profession. On the topic of technology, artificial intelligence is having an impact on many different workplaces. In fact, one client who I was chatting to mentioned that artificial intelligence is now actually a board member in their organization. But the example here is really the latest and greatest in terms of artificial intelligence. And no, it's not Jimmy Fallon on the left of the screen there. We have Sophia, who's a humanoid robot on the right of the screen. You might have seen Sophia. She's been around for a few years now. She does hit the talk show circuit. She's often cracking jokes about overthrowing the world, which is a little bit unsettling to hear from a humanoid robot. But probably the most remarkable thing about Sophia is that she's been made a citizen of a country. So a couple of years ago, she was made a citizen of Saudi Arabia. So it's certainly an interesting time that we find ourselves living in. If we start to think about some of the social and demographic forces that are impacting our world, we know that by the year 2025, 75% of the workforce will be comprised of millennials. I think many of us know that millennials certainly have different expectations about their work experience. They're wanting to work for purpose-driven organisations. They want to have a greater impact on decision-making. They want to use their well-developed skills, maybe not in just one organisation, but potentially across multiple organisations, giving rise to this idea of the gig economy. And I guess where it becomes quite complex for organisations is that many organisations today have built their employee value proposition based upon the needs and expectations of those employees before them, so the X's and the boomers and perhaps the traditionalists before them. So for organisations to succeed, it is very much about attracting and retaining, developing the best available talent. If the talent pool is comprised of millennials, then the organisations need to adapt. Some of these trends were picked up in the World Economic Forum publication, The Future of Jobs, where they talked about the importance of technical skills. However, that's what's more important today is really to have a stronger grasp of some of those human-only characteristics those emotional intelligence qualities are really quite important in differentiating to the world and or to people in work moving forward. So what does this mean for leaders? If we think about leaders today leading in this VUCA world, perhaps leaders do need a higher set of leadership competencies, and maybe they're described as a VUCA set of leadership competencies. So here we have vision, vision being a capability that helps to offset the volatility in the world. If we have leaders with vision that can talk about the purpose of an organisation, the direction, the mission that the organisation is headed in, then it helps to kind of smooth out some of those bumps that we might find along the way. Understanding helps to offset some of the uncertainty in the world. Understanding is really about leaders recognising that they don't need to have all the answers. Indeed, they won't. And it's really encouraging leaders to act in a more inclusive way, looking to draw in different insights from across the business to give them greater understanding to help, again, offset some of that uncertainty that they might be experiencing. Having a competency around clarity can be quite helpful to offset the complexity in our work. Clarity can come down to really getting quite simple about how we do understand our business, that whilst there are many different elements involved in our businesses, ultimately at the end of the day we have a product or a service that we're looking to offer to a particular customer. So if we can look at our business in that more simplistic way, then we can get closer to our customer, understand who they are, how their needs might be changing, and then how we might need to feed that information back into our business to change our products, our services, and maybe the way we look to interact with our customers. And then finally, agility. Agility is something which helps to offset the ambiguity in the world. If we can have agile leaders and leadership teams that aren't locking in to 5-year business plans or 3-year or 12-month business plans, instead we have leaders that have a sense of where they're headed, but they do have that agility or flexibility to be able to change course based upon new information as it does come to hand. So higher order VUCA leadership capabilities are certainly important, but there are still some traditional leadership characteristics that are important today. And if we do think about the traditional organisation, the research suggests that 70% of organisations are still structured in this way. And if we think about the leader there on the left of the screen, so if we think about that leader, who authorises that leader to go about their work? And I'm sure many of you are saying to yourself, well, it's the CEO or the person that leader, that manager happens to be reporting to, will give that leader a certain amount of delegated authority to go about executing the tasks or the responsibilities that they do have. However, who is that leader really dependent upon to be successful in their work? And again, I'm sure many of you on the line are thinking it's going to be the team under them. So for a leader to be successful, they need to certainly have the delegated authority from their manager. However, what's probably more important for them to be successful in their work is to have that authority recognised by their team. And if we can have a team or if we have a team that does recognise that leader's authority and responsibility, then it will tend to be a team that is more high performing. It achieves its tasks. It can be innovative. It may have high levels of well-being and mental health outputs or outcomes, high levels of commitment and engagement, and high levels of discretionary effort. So a lot of positive things can come from a team that will recognise the authority of their leader. On the flip side, if we have a team that doesn't recognize the authority of their leader, then we can have a team that will maybe not achieve their results, where there's conflicts, teams are maybe pulled in different directions, have different agendas, there's high levels of absenteeism, lower levels of commitment engagement, and lower levels of well-being generally. So how does a leader go about engaging their team? How does a leader go about obtaining the authority and the respect and the authorization of their team? Well, personality research gives us some insights here. So according to our personality, or according to what we know about personality, is that all leaders do have a natural leadership style. So according to our personalities, all leaders will have a natural leadership style, and that may be, to be naturally more inclusive. It might be naturally more innovative or more kind of direct and controlling, but we'll have a different leadership style naturally. And in terms of employees working within organizations, we all also have a natural followership style. Meaning that there's a certain expectation that we might have from our leaders, which is, again, maybe it's about working with a leader that provides more direction and control, or might be to work with a leader that has is more inclusive or is more engaging in their approach, more supportive in their approach. So what does this mean for leaders? Well, for leaders, they need to be able to develop a flexibility to be able to meet the psychological needs of their team. So it comes initially from self-awareness, self-understanding, to understand their natural leadership style, their strengths associated with that, but also the blind spots associated with that. And then from that, a leader can develop greater flexibility by looking to apply new behaviours, try out new leadership styles to be able to be more, or to be able to be more successful in meeting the psychological needs of their team. So there are these traditional human capabilities of leadership that are important. We do need to have leaders that are able to communicate well, to be able to meet the different psychological needs of their team, to have different approaches in making decisions, and to be able to influence across organizations. We've done some research at the Myers-Briggs Company also, and it showed us that this was to look at over 1,000 leaders. In fact, I think it was over 17,000 leaders in terms of the core part of this research. And we found that when we were trying to identify what were the differentiating characteristics of high-performing leaders, indeed the top 3% of leaders, these are the characteristics that were identified, and this was using a trait-based personality tool that we have known as the CPI 260. So quite interesting to see the different kinds of characteristics that were identified there. So high-performing leaders will tend to have high levels of tolerance, so meaning that they're more open-minded and respectful of people of different backgrounds. They're going to have high levels of responsibility or conscientiousness. Indeed, research has shown that employees at all levels that have high levels of responsibility or conscientiousness tend to be higher performing. You have leaders who are more flexible. They tend to be high performing. So we want leaders who aren't locked in, who have a fixed mindset, but instead have more of a growth mindset. We're looking for leaders that have more of a creative temperament, who are prepared to look for new and innovative solutions to some of the challenges they might experience in their work. Amicability, suggesting that we need to have leaders who are able to kind of get along well with people. Empathy is about having that understanding of others, that concern and insight into others. And the last one there is good impression, which is quite an interesting scale to have on there. But good impression is really suggesting that we need leaders who are able to look at to be authentic, but who are able to look at a situation realistically, but are also able to look at the more positive sides of the present situation also. So in terms of this characteristic, it is a case that you can have too much of a good thing. There are some leaders out there who might be too high on good impression, which means that they might be talking everything up, being too optimistic even when the world is falling down around them. Leaders who are too low on this particular scale might be too frank, too blunt, too pessimistic at times. But to have a good level of balance of good impression can be really helpful in leadership roles. So all of this is really to suggest that self-awareness is important, and we would suggest that self-awareness is the leadership agility superfood. We do need leaders to become more self-aware, understand their natural strengths, to understand their natural blind spots, and through doing so to develop greater flexibility or agility in terms of how they apply their leadership behaviours. You might be interested to know that there is research to support this too, that self-awareness does show links towards high levels of performance. But what's particularly interesting is that there are links between self-awareness and well-being. So the high levels of self-awareness we have can lead to high levels of well-being, and that actually having high levels of well-being can predict performance. So we have a number of studies referenced here. The first study looks at the links between self-awareness and well-being. So once again, this here is saying, this was a study looking at, again, the relationship between a self-awareness measure and many different measures of well-being, personality, tools and other kind of measurements as well. And they found that those people who had high levels of self-awareness tended to just have more pleasant feelings generally. They had high levels of self-esteem. Those people who had lower levels of self-awareness tended to have more feelings around anxiety, depression, and other general unpleasant feelings. In this here is looking at multiple studies across multiple industries, including government workers or council workers, university workers, and general organisational samples, which is looking at the links between well-being and high performance. What they found here, there were many different measures of well-being and performance, but in each case they found that there were certainly significant or meaningful links between the two. So as you can see here, multiple studies showing that perhaps in terms of performance, up to 30% can be accounted for by, or 30% of, or 31% of the employees' performance can be accounted for by well-being. But even down at the lower levels, 12 to 10%, still really great research there to show us that there are strong links between how people feel and the performance that they deliver at work. We're also making that jump from self-awareness to performance. So there are certainly many studies that show having high levels of self-awareness can lead to high levels of performance. This is showing us the percentage that is accounted for of performance by self-awareness. So we can see if we look at performance in terms of direct reports ratings of their behaviour, a few different studies there, a few different examples there, even self-ratings of performance or transformational leadership. We're starting to see that there are strong links between self-awareness and performance here. So I did warn you that we did want this to be a slightly interactive session. So the question I'd like you to reflect upon just for 30 seconds or so is, how would you know if someone is self-aware? So we know self-awareness is important. The research is suggesting that. But what does self-awareness look like? How do you know if you're interacting with someone who is self-aware? So we'll just allow maybe up to 60 seconds for people to maybe make a couple of notes, a few examples, and Kat will share those. You don't mind doing that, do you, Kat?
No. So just if you want to share an example, just put it in the questions box or the chat box in your GoToWebinar dashboard, and I'll share that out with the group. A few comments and questions have come through. So one would be they adjust their behavior dynamically in different situations. They're not defensive or overconfident. They would have the capacity to self-regulate and value others' input. They demonstrate empathy. They know how to regulate their behaviors. They can potentially derail a group, and they inhibit that behavior. A question came through as well. When you refer to self-awareness, is that synonymous with emotional intelligence?
Great. So thank you for the question, and thank you for the feedback there. In terms of self-awareness is certainly a key component of emotional intelligence. And I'll share an example, or sorry, a definition of self-awareness in just right now. So self-awareness is the extent to which people are consciously aware of their interactions or relationships with others and of their internal state. So for those of you familiar with some of the work in the area of emotional intelligence, yes, there's a strong alignment between the definition of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. So it's about having that understanding of ourselves, what makes us tick, but also having that awareness of other people and looking at our interactions that we might have with those people and how they are impacting those people. Now, this next slide here, I promise you, is much more effective in a live workshop environment.
We do have a hand raising.
We do have a hand raising.
In here.
Excellent, thank you. I'd still argue that I think it's much more effective with a room of people. But yes, even if you'd like to raise your hand on the screen, that'd be great. Or even if you just do it from where you are in your home office or in your office at the moment, that'd be great.
We've got hands being raised.
Okay, excellent. Kat's got both hands up. Me too. Excellent. Please trust me, I'm a psychologist. This is not a trick. So thank you all for doing that. And I'm going to round up, so about 100% of people on the call raise their hands to suggest that they are self-aware. And look, it's really interesting, the research here. So the research here would suggest that 95% of people believe that they are self-aware, but only 15% actually are self-aware. So now the good news is I'm convinced that everyone on the line, and indeed in the room here in Parkville, is part of that 15%. It's everyone else that we know, everyone else that that's not not so self-aware. But look, it's really interesting research. I think for a lot of us who are working in that development space, I think there are many people who we work with who tend to think that they know a lot about themselves. But I think the key message here is that there's always something new that we can learn about ourselves, whether it's us as leaders or us in our personal lives and just our interactions with other people. So how do you develop self-awareness? And perhaps I'll open that up to the group as well. If you could just list a couple of points as to how you might go about developing self-awareness, how you might become more self-aware.
I'm getting a few comments coming through already.
Great.
So being curious, being mindful, openly seeking feedback from others, listening to others, reflecting, asking for feedback. Don't assume you know everything. Continually ask and self-reflect.
Fantastic. So some really great examples there. So I think initially being open to receiving feedback, being curious, having that mindset that there's always something more that we can learn about ourselves, and it can be really helpful. I do like that idea of being curious, and I think it also points to this idea of having the motivation to be self-aware. So I think motivation is really important. for people to recognise that becoming more self-aware, developing our self-awareness is really critical in terms of helping us. Maybe it's in the workplace, being a leader, and how we can learn more about ourselves and how we can be more effective in different situations. But even outside of the work environment, having that motivation to improve and to be better can be really helpful too. So we conducted a study at the Myers-Briggs Company of over 1,000 people, and we asked them to share their insights as to how they go about developing self-awareness. And you can see here that we've broken the feedback or the responses back into two broad categories of feedback versus other methods. So seeking feedback from other people was certainly a very popular way. So feedback from peers, family, a manager, and perhaps wider network, other people who we might work with, other key stakeholders. Then beyond that, there are a few things listed here. So personality assessments were very popular, going through coaching or receiving feedback from a trained practitioner. 360-degree feedback assessments, also quite useful, journaling or values assessments. So just in terms of the topic of assessments, you can see that 360s are probably less commonly used than maybe other methods. I guess the comment I'd make there is that for those of you who've been involved in 360, whether it's to be a participant in one or to maybe deliver one, as you know, that they're a very involved process where it's not really just one person going through a 360, it's in that person looking to engage maybe 10, 15, 20 other people to provide them with feedback. So it is quite an involved process. They can be quite expensive to go through too. And so it tends to be reserved more for emerging talent and leaders within organizations. So really powerful, but maybe less commonly used than other kinds of assessments like personality tools, where we're looking at a self-report based tool where people can go through and find out some insights in terms of who they are. We also asked people to rate how effective they found each of the different methods, and this was a rating out of 5. And look, I think overall you could round a lot of that up to say that I think using many different methods for obtaining feedback or obtaining greater levels of insight to develop our self-awareness can all be very helpful. But just to pick up the point around assessments. So one of the benefits of using assessments, or a number of the benefits of using assessments, is that they're objective and they're quick. So within a short space of time, might be 30 minutes or a couple of hours, you can go through an assessment and receive some really helpful feedback about our strengths and our blind spots. The other great thing about assessments is that they can give us models, they can give us language to help us really understand ourselves better. It can make some of these intangible qualities or experiences that we might have, and they start to have more meaning because we have a greater vocabulary to better understand them, and it leads to us having these aha moments. These models and language can also give us a better sense of understanding others, and can ultimately be helpful for us in providing us insights for our development, and once we have those insights, to then prioritize our learning. The image that you can see on the right of your screen, that's from the CPI 260 coaching report for leaders, which looks at some of our personality characteristics and then how they overlay to certain leadership characteristics, and as to whether they might be strengths or blind spots. There can, however, be many challenges in using assessments. So sometimes we might have assessments that are simply inadequate. So they just haven't been well constructed. It may be that the sample that's been used is irrelevant or not relevant for the population that you're working with. It might measure It might be a flashy report with all the latest buzzwords, but is it really measuring what it's meant to measure? So, have you had a look at the manual? Is the construct validation there to know that the content that we're measuring is actually well established and validated through multiple studies? We can sometimes have the instance of maybe using the wrong assessment for the wrong purpose. There's no one assessment that is right for every situation. I was working with a client who they had been running a executive leadership development program, and they were using a few of our tools. They were using MBTI, the FIRO, and a 360 that we represent, and that had great success in using those tools as part of this leadership development program. And we happened to be meeting with them, and they said, look, as we did go out to them, they said, look, we've just received some great news. We've been given approval to roll out an emerging leaders talent development program. And, we thought we would just kind of cut down the content of the exec leader program, but and still apply those 3 same assessments. We said, look, that's great. The 2 of the tools that they were using, the MBTI and the FIRO, were certainly very relevant to be using in that situation. It looks at personality and interpersonal style. But the 360 that they were using wasn't really going to be appropriate to be used with the emerging talent group. It wasn't going to be appropriate for a couple of reasons. One was the leadership competencies were really pitched at the executive level. They were looking at things like setting the vision and leading the organisation, and certainly these are things that this emerging talent group wouldn't have had a chance to demonstrate. So it would be quite frustrating for the emerging talent to go through to receive feedback against competencies that aren't relevant. Equally, it'd be very frustrating for raters to spend their time rating these same emerging talent against these competencies that just perhaps weren't relevant. So we do need to make sure we're looking at the competencies and if they are relevant for the groups that we are looking to work with. Unqualified interpretation can be a challenge. Sometimes someone might get access to a tool that they're simply not qualified to use, so they might be drawing the wrong insights out of the tool, and which can be quite damaging to people who are looking to make some really important life decisions. They might be looking to change their career. They might be looking to see how they need to develop their leadership style, and they might be getting some faulty information. So we want to make sure people are qualified to use the tools that they have access to. Qualified practitioners will also realise the importance of looking at the cultural context in interpreting the tools. They'll also be able to integrate the information with other feedback, other insights, and also make sure that they're looking to help the individual with developmental actions. And that last point there is also key, that there's no point using assessments if you're not going to follow it through to provide someone with some developmental support. It'll almost be irresponsible perhaps to say, look, you have strengths in these areas, development needs in these areas, and well, good luck to you. So really we do want to make sure we follow it through to give people the tools that they need to develop those blind spots. In terms of the world of assessments, there are many different kinds of assessments out there. And I guess I just wanted to share with you a model that we keep in mind when we look at the different assessments that we use. And how the assessments vary is perhaps in terms of how challenging or how confronting they might be for the participant to go through. So initially you can look at self-report tools. These are validated tools that might look at personality preferences or behavioural preferences, where the individual will go through and explore their results and understand what they might mean for them in terms of their leadership strengths or blind spots, what it might mean in terms of communication, decision-making, how they might work within a team, and so on. Really powerful, really insightful, but still quite comfortable for the individual to go through. We can then move into more challenging assessments like normative assessments. These are where we're measuring people along a continuum. They're more trait-based, and we're comparing people against a reference group or a normative group. So if I was to go through an emotional intelligence assessment and find out that I have low levels of emotional intelligence, that's going to be some hard feedback for me to take on board. However, if I've been through a less challenging assessment first, like a personality preference tool, which recognizes that we all have strengths, we all have blind spots, if I'm more open to that, that feedback, then I'm going to be more open to receiving this developmental feedback as I move through more challenging assessments. And the highest tier there, we have a multi-rater or 360-degree feedback assessments, which can be really confronting. They're really powerful, can give us really great insights in terms of some of our leadership strengths and blind spots, or indeed our emotional and social competencies. However, if people go through these assessments and they're not ready, they're not maybe emotionally mature enough, or they haven't had the benefit of going through other assessments first to really get that insight and develop that emotional maturity, then there's a great chance that people will reject the feedback from a 360, or it might be derailing. It might be too confronting, too direct, and it might derail them in terms of their leadership pathway. So it is very important to think about the assessments that we're using. What are they measuring? But also how confronting they are for the individuals to go through. And for us, a lot of the work that we do here, the longer term leadership programs that we design, will often incorporate multiple assessments into those programs. So we'll take people through more of a self-report tool, a personality preference tool, then we might look at emotional intelligence or interpersonal style, and then also to incorporate a 360 and to make sure that we have the chance to step people through that at the right time and to integrate all those insights to really give people a more well-rounded view of who they are. I just wanted to share with you a little bit of data on the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is an example of, if we just flick back, one of those self-report assessments. So it's a personality preference tool. For those of you not familiar with the Myers-Briggs, it's been around for over 70 years. It's been subject to a significant amount of studies and independent validation. It's used by about 90% of the Fortune 100 companies. And I think a lot of the great success of the tool is that it's used not only at the entry level for employees across the organization, but it translates well at executive levels too. And it does have a broad range of application, including teams and leadership, conflict and change. And the real strength of the tool is that it gives people a model and a language for better understanding themselves and others. And what I wanted to share about the Myers-Briggs type indicator is just some of the feedback people had received or how it had helped them. So when people had gone through the assessment, 88% feel as though that they could capitalize on their strengths more. 74% felt more confident as a leader. 72% felt more confident in their contribution at work. And 65% said that they made better decisions. This is because, based upon our personality, we all do have a natural orientation for making decisions, and the Myers-Briggs or the MBTI will give us a model to help us develop that, to give us insights into the different perspectives, things we might be overlooking, and how we might want to incorporate those insights into making more well-rounded decisions. And this was actually what I forgot to mention. This was based upon a study of 1,000 people who we asked. So I mentioned earlier that if we aren't going to follow it through with development, then it's probably not a pathway we should start on. So it is really important to think about development when we're looking at leaders. And this here is quite a useful model. It's a simple model, but really quite helpful in terms of thinking about the steps we might need to go through to develop leaders. And this is offered through the Centre for Creative Leadership, who are, they've been for a long time have been leaders in the area of executive development and have been pioneers and done a lot of research in the area of developing leaders. They suggested we need to have 3 key components critical to developing leaders, or to developing leaders that achieve results. The starting point really is around assessment. So to be able to use assessments as a way for leaders to become more self-aware, to get that insight, whether it's through a personality assessment, emotional intelligence assessment, 360. These assessments can give us great insights in terms of our strengths and our blind spots. What we then want to do is to follow that through and to give those leaders support to start to close those blind spots or those development gaps that they might have in their role. And that support, those development steps can come from a variety of sources. It might be on the job, so just look at finding more opportunities to practice a new skill, or to refine and get feedback about a skill that they're wanting to develop. It might be to attend a formal training program, to do some mentoring or role modeling, receiving support from a coach internally or externally to the organisation. So there's many different ways we can receive support, start to close those development gaps. Last point there is around challenge, and that's really about how we stretch leaders. So it could be to take a leader and to move them into a line management role, take them from a line role and give them the chance to manage a P&L, to go from managing a P&L to maybe closing down a business, or maybe to open up a new one, have a cross-functional experience or a cross-cultural experience. These are all important steps. So I think the more experiences we can give leaders, the more we can challenge them, the better we are in terms of developing them to achieve results longer term. So as we look to wrap this first section of the psychology of leadership, in terms of the leadership component, what we've been talking a bit about is that there's many different things we can be doing to develop self-awareness, and self-awareness is key. Self-awareness helps us in terms of building our well-being and performance. So certainly it's worthwhile looking at how we can develop our self-awareness and how we can develop ourselves as leaders. We're now going to move through to looking at leaders working together as part of leadership teams. Last year, Deloitte, or each year, Deloitte put out their Global Human Capital Trends report, which is always a great read. And one of the comments they made last year was about the symphonic C-suite. And their comment was really that the world is changing at an incredible rate, and leaders and leadership teams, that leaders can't or can no longer work alone in silos, just focusing on their own business unit. We really do need to have leaders who are able to and prepared to work together in more of an agile way, because the world around us is changing so quickly. We need leaders to be able to share their insights and to work together to be able to lead the organisation and direct the organisation into the way that it's going to continue to achieve sustainable results. So self-awareness is the superfood for leadership agility, which is the point we made earlier. What is the superfood for leadership team agility? And we would suggest that is, or the answer to that question is trust. So many of you may be familiar with Lencioni's work on the 5 characteristics of great teams. And trust is the foundation that he identified of having high-performing teams. And there's different elements that he has identified, saying that for teams to be able to achieve results and be high-performing, they won't be able to do that until they trust each other. This is really about teams or individuals within teams being prepared to be vulnerable, being able to share their strengths, but also their blind spots, to be able to ask for help. And when you can get to that point of working with others in a way that trust has been established, you can then move through to have constructive conflict. If we don't have trust, then conflict may be unconstructive. It may also be that people don't have conflict. In fact, people are just kind of working independently on their own projects within a team. But if we can have trust and we can bring people together, they are happy to challenge each other, to have more constructive conflict around the work that they're working on. And as they do that, they start to get that shared sense of buy-in, because you've had a chance to shape an initiative or to shape an idea, and it's now become, you know, part of your own. So if we can have that constructive conflict, that can then lead to that buy-in or commitment. If we are committed to the work that we're doing, we can then assign accountability and move forward to achieve results. But the foundation really is about achieving trust within teams first. And we're a big fan of Lencioni's model. And he's also a big fan of the MBTI, because he often recommends the Myers-Briggs type indicator as being a great tool for developing trust in teams. I might also mention that this work does align with other work that's been conducted recently. Some of you might be familiar with the work that Google did on high-performing teams, and they found that a similar model. The foundation of their tool was psychological safety. So again, very similar to trust, that for teams to be high-performing in Google, they needed to first have that sense of psychological safety. Just another comment about teams and leadership teams is really to recognize that teamwork doesn't happen overnight. It won't happen on its own. It's about people making a choice to work as a team, but perhaps more than that, organizations need to recognize that it really is a strategic decision for teams to be able to work well or to have high-performing teams. A lot of organizations are quite dynamic. There are teams that might change their composition in terms of people at different times. There might be short-term teams, longer-term teams. There's things that can be done to help teams be more effective, to come together, to build that trust that they can be high-performing. So we do need organizations to be aware of that, and also for the individuals within organizations to recognize that they need to make that choice to buy into working as part of a team. And I guess the point that I made before about using the MBTI as a way to develop trust in Lencioni's model, assessments can be very helpful in building trust in teams. And without doubt, for any team that you'd want to work with, you'd want to start off with a tool that is lower in terms of its challenge. It's a great way for people to start to openly share more about themselves, using insights that aren't too challenging, using insights that really suggest that everyone does have strengths, and indeed everyone all has blind spots. But from that, when you are working with a more established team, you can then take those teams through more confronting assessments over time once that trust has been established. And we've done this with a number of the teams that we've worked with, where, especially over longer periods, we've initially taken a team through the MBTI and have done multiple sessions in looking at communication style and leadership style, decision-making preferences, looking at different dynamics between the leader and the team. And then over time, I've introduced other assessments like the FIRO, which looks at the different needs that we have around inclusion, control, and affection. And then over time, we've also introduced the 360 as part of a team, where the individuals within the team have looked at a group report of their collective strengths and blind spots and be able to discuss that. But that's something you wouldn't jump into because it can be quite confronting. But over time, you can take teams through more challenging and increasingly insightful assessments to really help their performance. The last area we wanted to move into is organisational alignment. And the first thing we wanted to discuss here are I guess some insights that were shared through a Harvard Business Review article that looked at what were some of the silent killers of leadership development. And just to work through this, now the first point you can see there is to have unclear strategy and values. So if an organisation is maybe not clear on its direction, excuse me, is not clear on how they want people to behave, what are the values they want people to be able to demonstrate, then it's really difficult in terms of, what's the starting point for developing a leader if you don't really know how they need to behave, what the expectations are within a certain organisation. So that can certainly get in the way. The second point is when senior executives don't practice what they preach. So you might have an organisation that has a well-defined vision and mission. It's gone through and articulated its values and how it wants its employees to behave. However, if the executives aren't practicing those behaviours, aren't living those values, both in terms of what they demonstrate themselves through their own actions, but also reinforcing in terms of both positively and maybe negatively reinforcing or pulling up people who might not be acting in accordance with the values or behaviours, then the broader organisation will start to lose faith as to, are we really taking this seriously around here? So we do need to make sure that leaders are really practicing those values, those behaviours consistently, so that that will kind of permeate throughout the organisation. Sometimes there might be an avoidance or unawareness of issues where we have leaders who aren't being candid with each other, they're not being direct about what their development needs are, or they may just simply not be tuned into what's going to be important in developing people within an organisation. Sometimes we can have an issue of inefficient organisational design, where we're working in a highly complex organisation, maybe it's quite matrixed, and people just don't have that accountability for developing employees and developing leaders. Some organisations may not have leadership or developing leaders as a top issue on their agenda. They might be very bottom line focused, wanting to cut costs, achieve results, but they're not making the link between the importance for developing people and ultimately achieving those results on a sustainable basis. And the last point here is, again, this point around psychological safety. So as a leader, if I've gone and attended a leadership development program and being supported by an executive coach, and I've received insights into my leadership strengths, but also my blind spots, and I've developed some skills in terms of new ways to behave or new leadership skills to try out. If I go back to the organisation and I don't feel safe to be able to do that, if I don't feel that I can do that and stumble, if I can't go or try these new skills out and to receive feedback about how I can implement them better, if I think that my peers and my manager, my direct reports won't give me that support in doing that, then ultimately I won't. There's going to be less of a chance of that learning sticking, that development kind of really taking hold due to issues around psychological safety. I think this is really important to look at just in terms of, again, thinking about developing leaders, developing leadership teams, and while they're both really important initiatives, we do need to think more broadly as well about the broader context into how we might be looking to develop our leaders and leadership teams. And also, I guess a model I wanted to introduce to you, which really kind of taps into that first point about maybe being unclear in terms of the strategy or values. And that's to give consideration to the broader organisational focus of the company in which you're working with or in. And we tend to look at organisations in terms of two different dimensions. So one is in terms of their inner versus outer focus. So are they more inwardly focused in terms of their own people and process, or are they an organisation that is more outwardly focused in terms of the environment and competition? The second dimension is around consistency. Is it an organisation that really values consistency, order, process, or is it more flexible and innovative in its approach? So these two different dimensions can give rise to 4 different types of organisational focus. The first being order, which is to be an organisation that broadly is more characterised around process, efficiency, reliability, uniformity, and again is more inwardly focused. If we're inwardly focused but more versatile, then we might have more of a people focus. So an orientation around commitment, development, communication, helping people be better. If we're more outwardly focused, but also value that consistency, then we're more of a results-oriented organisation. So we're scanning the environment, benchmarking ourselves against competition, looking to grow, achieve results, and again, beat the competition. And the fourth area here is around innovation. So we're outwardly focused, but more versatile. So we value things like creativity, individuality, and transformation. So just to maybe help to reinforce this model by looking at 4 different types of organisations, 4 different organisations, and maybe to think about where they might belong, and be prepared for some really highly skilled PowerPoint skills coming through here. The animation I've been able to achieve overnight using this is outstanding. So if we look at order, which organisation do we think best would be characterised by order? I might ask that of the group. See if there's a few examples coming through.
ASIC.
All right, thank you, Kat. I've forgotten which one come next. I think it's people. All right, so people, which one do we think is people?
Red Cross.
Thank you, Kat. And for those online, results?
VHC.
Well done. And the last one there is innovation. Great. So I think we can all see how this model works. What I now wanted to introduce to you as part of this is that this model can be applied across 4 key frames of organizational activity. So we can look at the degree of focus or the different kind of focus we might have around our customers, which includes our products and services that we offer our customers, our strategy, which is about the orientation that we have for the long term, culture, which is about how our people go about delivering their work, and leadership. So what's the orientation of the leadership within the organisation? And I guess the premise here is that if we can have each of these areas aligned, so if each of these areas are aligned around order or results or people or innovation, then that means that organisational success is going to be more likely. If, however, we find that these 4 different areas are misaligned, so if we have a customer or about our products and services and our orientation around customers is more around order, as an example, so we have more standardized products and services, but we have a leadership group that's looking to push into innovation, we might start to find some resistance there. Another example might be if we're a startup and we've had more of an innovative focus around our customers, so we're quite flexible around our products and services. They're quite dynamic. Our strategy is certainly innovative. Our culture is very agile. But we then bring in a new leader that's looking to really push for results. Again, there's going to be some resistance there. So this model is quite helpful to look at in terms of seeing, what is the different focus we have across these organizational frames, and to see, is there a level of alignment or is there misalignment, which might be getting in the way of organisational success. So just to share with you a case study where we use this model and where it has links back to developing leaders and leadership teams. It's actually a case study where we won an award for it. The case study, Kat, it's available in the portal there?
Yes, so in the handout section of the GoToWebinar dashboard, you'll find a link to the case study to download.
Great, and it also includes that model that was shared before. So this, in terms of this case study, so the organisation, it's a mid-sized legal firm. Sorry, just getting my bearings again. So it's a mid-sized legal firm that had a long period of success in going about their work, but they started to recognise that they needed to make some shifts. They recognised that the employee needs were starting to change. They wanted to work in a more agile, innovative way, that customers were seeking greater flexibility. So this organisation that had been quite successful really built around more of a hierarchical command and control style approach where all the decision making was really left to the practice of the leaders in the practice, the partners in the practice, which then had the result of employees becoming more reactive. They found that they really needed to shift things around. And to their credit, they had attempted to do this. So they had identified that there were some changes that needed to occur. They had tried to make some changes, and unfortunately those changes weren't successful. And they recognised that they needed some help, so we came in to give them the help, to giving them some insights around their culture and what are some actions that they could take to really help them move in the right direction that they're wanting to head into. So we took them through our organisational alignment survey, and we took not only the partner group but all employees through it, and we asked them to sort of rate where they are today versus where do they think they want to head into the future. And you might not be surprised that as we went through it, the results that came through showed that they were very high around order, generally speaking. Also some elements there around people and results. However, there was a strong consistency in terms of their approach around order. So very much that hierarchical command and control style. But when we asked them about where do they want to be in their future, there was certainly a strong shift away from the current model of order to something that was much more innovative. So still wanting to achieve results, still wanting to support people, but really seeing a strong level of alignment around innovations to work in a more agile and inclusive way. So these are just two of the graphs that we shared, two of the data points. We broke this down across the whole day with the partner group, and it was a very, very insightful day. It was useful for the leaders to have this data to look at to see how were they performing today, what do people think around their area of focus, around customer strategy, culture and leadership, what was aligned, what might not have been aligned, and what needs to be aligned in the future directionally for the organisation. It led to some very robust discussions, which ultimately really was quite helpful in developing the team. So again, if we think back to Lencioni's model about how you create a high-performing team, it does start with building trust, and from trust starting to have that constructive conflict, and to have this objective data for the partners to come together to explore it, to debate it, that robust discussion really built trust within the team. It also built commitment and buy-in in terms of where does the leadership team need to take the organisation into the future. They also, to their credit, recognised that there were some changes that they need to make to be able to shift from this high order culture to something that was more innovative. it couldn't just happen from in terms of them changing their behaviour. There were some structural changes that they would also need to make within the organisation. So the leaders, they recognised they needed to become more inclusive in terms of, and to communicate more in terms of their approach. They need to be more strategic. And the key decision that they made there was to employ a practice manager. This was a new role to the organisation for them to be able to delegate a lot of that decision-making responsibility, the day-to-day decisions, to that practice manager, so the partners could be freed up to develop, to develop as leaders, to become more inclusive, to be more strategic. And ultimately, it led to some really positive outcomes. So there was a point where they brought some key employees together to workshop some new feedback they'd received and some new insights that they'd received, and they recognised that there was a new industry focus, a new client group that they wanted to pursue, and they decided to really invest in that part of the business. So they put more resources in that area by bringing people together. They recruited more people to that part of the organisation, and it led to them being or having more highly profitable growth. So it was a great example of how you can bring teams together, give them some insights, and allow them to have those constructive discussions to build the team, and then to support them through implementing those changes so they can become more high performing. Great. So what we'd like to do now is really just kind of wrap the session, and then I'm going to hand over to Kat as well. So during the session today, there were kind of three broad areas that we talked about developing leaders, leadership teams, and looking more broadly across the organisation in terms of organisational alignment. There were some key themes that we touched on in terms of building self-awareness in leaders, and that there's different ways we can build self-awareness in leaders, whether it's through feedback or through assessments, but ultimately that building self-awareness can lead to high levels of well-being and high levels of performance. We then looked at leadership teams. We recognised that developing leadership teams today is critically important, and the starting point for that is to build trust. If we don't have trust within teams, then there's really not going to be much of a chance for them to be high performing. And that assessments could be really helpful in building trust, but perhaps more importantly, assessments can be really helpful in building trust and building teams. But I think what's more important than that is really to have that mindset as an individual or as an organisation that you really need to invest in building teams and teamwork. And then we talked a bit about organisational alignment, so that there are certainly 6 silent killers that can get in the way of developing leaders and leadership teams, and we need to keep that in mind as we do plan our leadership development initiatives. And ultimately, a key message that we hope that you take away from today, once again, is that the performance of leaders and leadership teams can be greatly enabled through the power of psychological insight. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Kat. Who's going to share with you a few other resources.
Great. Thank you, Cameron, and thank you all again for joining the webinar today. Cameron shared some great insights and key takeaways for developing agile leaders, leadership teams, and ensuring alignment with organizational strategy. But as we know, leaders can have a tremendous impact on the culture and success of organizations, and therefore leadership development can go a lot deeper than what we're able to cover in a 90-minute period. So if you'd like to see some more concrete examples of how other organizations have successfully incorporated leadership development programs, we do have case studies available for download in both written and video format on our website. We also have research in support of our psychometric tools, including a white paper that describes how to successfully pair the MBTI with Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team model. Also, prior to the session, you should have received a link to a chapter out of our trends report discussing how leaders can successfully navigate a VUCA landscape. We do have the full trends report available for complimentary download on our website as well, and that includes other topics like gig economy, always-on culture, digital disruption of HR. So there's a lot of really great topics within that trends report that you can review. For those of you that are new to the Myers-Briggs Company, we work with our clients in a couple different ways. One, we do offer consulting services where one of our experienced trainers, like Cameron, can come into your organization and design and deliver customized solutions depending on your business requirements. Or we do offer certification in our various assessments that will give you the tools and resources that you need to design and deliver your own training programs. Cameron did mention a few of the tools during our webinar today, the MBTI, CPI, and CCL 360-degree feedback assessment suite. We do have other tools available, including emotional intelligence and talent selection tools. And there are brief descriptions of our various assessments in the handout section of the dashboard that you can review. And of course, you can find more information on our website. My colleagues and I will be following up with each of you to share the slides from today's webinar, along with a link to the recordings if you missed any portion of it. And we're also happy to connect with you if you'd like to ask us any specific questions or have specific support needs. So we will be in with you soon, and thank you all again for joining us today.
Great. Thank you all for joining us today. And if anyone did have any questions that they would like to ask, then please feel free to write those down now. For those of you who need to jump off, then once again, thank you very much for joining us, and the team will be looking to follow up with you. But otherwise, we'll keep the line open now for a couple of questions if there are any that do come through.
There was a question posed about the CPI research that was referenced in the beginning. Mm-hmm. If we have a link to more information on that.
Great. Yeah, I think we do have a white paper on that, so we'll dig into that, and if we can dig that up, we will send that through as part of the follow-up with the team. But that was that CPI research is something that we did with the Centre for Creative Leadership. So we looked at a database of leaders who had completed the CPI and had also completed, I think it might have been the benchmarks, the 360 feedback assessment, and that kind of went, or we looked at some of the relationships between the personality trait scales and the 360-degree feedback competencies that were both self-rated but also ratings from employees and managers and so on. But I think we might have a write-up of that report, so we'll look to get that out if we can. Great. Are there any other questions that have come through, Kat?
Another question was just if this session had been recorded, and yes, we did record it, and we will send out the recording following, hopefully in the next couple hours here, mm-hmm. As long as it uploads quickly.
Great. All right, so if there aren't any further questions at this point, again, please feel free to get in touch with us, but otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to have you on the line. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.